All right, it's that time of the day, my friends. We dive into the NFL, the Eagles, and everything that is happening here on 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen joins us, and John's appearance on the show brought to you by Harrah's Resort in Bally's Atlantic City, Wild Wild West. They're taking bets for the new sports books. Break up with your bookie. Wager today at the book. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. I just had the lines up for tonight's game. Got -1 Baltimore, over under 43. That's what we're looking at for the Thursday night football game. And you can listen to that game tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Mosher, McMullen, and Krause will lead you right in to the Thursday night football game here on 97.3. It's the debut edition tonight at the Landmark in Glassboro. Johnny Mack in the house. What is up, my man?
Hey, how are you guys?
We're doing well on a Thursday, week number 2 of Thursday Night Football. This is like the debut episode, though, of Thursday Night Football. That first one is like the special presentation, and now you got the Thursday Nighter between Baltimore and Cincinnati. I want to get your take real quick on Baltimore. I'm looking at Joe Flacco. They scored 47 last week. Is this like an offensive Baltimore team all of a sudden?
Yeah, I don't know about that. Similar to Tampa Bay as well with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, this is a week-to-week league. Everybody talks about it, and Jim Schwartz joked about it in his press conference earlier this week. It's, 16 teams think they're going to win the Super Bowl. 16 teams think they're going to get the number 1 draft choice this time of year. You can knock that down to 30 because you had one tie, but you get the point. Everybody's up, everybody's down. And in reality, somewhere in the middle, I think the Ravens are in that category as well. Joe Flacco has not historically performed well in Cincinnati. I think he's 3-6 as a starter there. So this will be an interesting game for Joe and the Ravens.
Yeah, and I know you look at Cincinnati on the other side of the ball. They went on the road and won. I mean, that's not easy to do in this league, especially a team that did make the playoffs last year. Indianapolis was not a very good team. They did get luck back, but Frank Reich was one of those 7 head coaches that did not win in game number 1. And you wonder, Marvin Lewis, a lot of people think that his time has come and gone, and yet he's still there. Does he, have a surprise team in the Bengals this year?
Well, I think they could be in the conversation for one of those wild card spots. We've talked about it a lot. I don't think the AFC is nearly as deep as the NFC as a whole. So I think there's more of a potential to have some surprise teams, at least at the bottom of the playoff ladder, and teams that have a good season. And there's a lot of things that go into it. First and foremost is staying healthy, obviously. I could see them in that category. A lot of people have forgotten them. We always joke about Marvin Lewis and his staying power and the fact nobody in the history of this game has coached more games with one team without winning a playoff game. But you know what? He got to the playoffs a bunch of times before they had this little downtick, and people forget about that. So it was a good team. I always talk about how well respected he is around this league. You can look at his coaching tree and understand that. So I don't think he's quite as bad as he is often portrayed. So I do think Cincinnati is one of those teams that could surprise some people.
Yeah, he kind of stabilized that franchise. They were a laughing stock for a while, and now you think about it, John, it's been his entire tenure, for the most part, that they've been somewhat relevant. I'm intrigued, at least, with them tonight. I think this is an interesting game tonight. A lot of times these Thursday night games, we do get some less than desirable matchups, but I think this matchup is an early season interesting one in that AFC North. And the winner of this game is going to be 2-0, and with Pittsburgh with that tie, should be very interesting. So that's our game tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Mosher, McMullen, and Krause will lead you right into that game. You can hear it starting at 8 o'clock. Mosher, McMullen, and Krause starts at 6. John, I want to, before we jump into some other NFL news in the games, Tony Gonzalez, shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. He, along with Ed Reed, Champ Bailey, London Fletcher, they were on the top of the list. Hines Ward, John Lynch for the 2019 Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is you don't have those slam dunk quarterbacks this year. Donovan McNabb's in there, Randall Cunningham, I think Steve McNair. Not the guys who you always have that, almost always have that one slam dunk quarterback that you know that's going to go in. This year it's the defensive back. You kind of know Ed Reed, Champ Bailey, as you mentioned, and Tony Gonzalez are those first ballot, almost no-brainers. And then you sort of work your way down from there and start thinking about guys that maybe have been waiting for a little bit of a lengthy period. But those are the three players that you kind of look at.
By the way, John, you got Randall Cunningham, Dave Craig, former Seahawk, Jeff Garcia, the journeyman extraordinaire, Donovan McNabb, and then here's an interesting one for you, Steve McNair.
Yeah, and I think the three, and I think Randall Cunningham's always an interesting question for reasons. If you look at his numbers and say, no, he's probably not a Hall of Fame quarterback, but I think you do have to put in his impact on the game as a whole and the way he kind of changed things. He was on the ground floor, I think, of that, changing the game, and I think that is a large check mark in this category. Ultimately, I don't think he's going to get in. I don't think any of those guys are going to get in. But of the group, I would say Randall and Steve McNair would probably be the closest, and Donovan would be right at that level as well.
All right, we look at position players. They usually are the guys that have good debates. Running backs, some interesting names here. I don't know. Let's see. I don't know that I see a name on this list that makes it for me. But let me get your take on it. You've covered the league, what, this is your 27th year covering the NFL, something like that?
Too many. You're aging me, Mike.
Sorry, buddy. Sean Alexander had a tremendous year or two. I don't know that he had a complete Hall of Fame career. Tiki Barber, Ernest Biner. I think when you think of Biner, he's Bill Buckner. He had a great career, and the only thing people remember about him is he fumbled. Larry Centers, Corey Dillon, Eddie George, interesting. Edgerrin James, another interesting one. Darrell Johnston, Eric Metcalf, Clinton Portis, Fred Taylor, Herschel Walker, Chris Warren, the former Seahawk, and Ricky Waters. Any of those guys for you? I got none. None of them.
Yeah, I got none. I think the closest is Fred Taylor because of the longevity. If you look at his numbers, he's a lot better than people.
And man, if he didn't get hurt so much.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sean Alexander is another one. Sort of, I think he would have been in the same category in the past as a guy like Terrell Davis, is sort of that dominant running back in a short shelf life. The difference is Davis won the Super Bowl, and Sean did not. So I think that's sort of the demarcation line, and of that group. And I know Pete Prisco's one of the people who have been pushing for Fred Taylor for years, Jacksonville guy. He was darn good, and people expected it. And Edgerrin James was also, as far as being a three-down running back, he was also really, really good.
All right, so receivers real quick. Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt, the two Rams from the Greatest Show on Turf era. Gary Clark, Henry Ellard, a former Ram as well. That was the Jim Everett years. Ocho Cinco, Chad Johnson, Derek Mason, Sterling Sharp, Rod Smith. And Hines Ward's an interesting one. I always hear people kind of enter him into the Hall of Fame conversation. In fact, the tweet that was put out by the Hall of Fame, his picture is among the people in the graphic. I don't view Hines Ward, certainly any of the other guys in there.
Well, I think Hines Ward is a Hall of Fame player, but I think it's sort of layered in the fact that he does a lot of things that receivers don't do anymore. He's one of the best, for instance, blocking wide receivers of all time. And that's those little things that maybe put you over the hump as far as some pretty really educated football people who are on that committee who vote for this. They tend to understand those things. So I think he's got a better chance than most people think he does, who just look at sort of numbers and top tens. I think for the most part, the voters look at eras and understand, for instance, that receivers today have pumped up numbers because of the changes in the game. And then those two Rams receivers, I think they're both Holt, Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt. In a lot of ways, I think they split the vote, and it hurts them both because they were obviously on the same team. I think, boy, it's tough to even say who was better. I think Holt was better when the Rams were at the top of their game, but I think Bruce was better overall. I think they're both phenomenal receivers.
Yeah, and then we told you that tight end, it's the first time on the ballot for Tony Gonzalez, and he'll definitely get in. Many regard him as maybe the best pass-catching tight end in league history. I mean, it's amazing. You almost forget, I mean, he played with the Chiefs and the Falcons. You almost forget how good he was back when he was first started with the Chiefs, because he was so good on the Falcons it almost overshadowed his Chiefs career. But he was just a completely different player when he came into the league with the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those, as I said, you don't even talk about him. You just move on.
Right.
You say he's in. That's the kind of player he was. And it's like a 2-minute conversation, and everybody agrees, and then you go on to the next guy. That's the kind of impact he had on this game and that position. And you're right. Again, when you talk about changes in the game and differences and how it's evolved, and now you see all these detached tight ends. They're more now. You never see a Y-back. You never see a Mark Bavaro type, a traditional.
Who's on the ballot, by the way?
Yeah, everybody is like Tony Gonzalez now. They're not as good as he was, but everybody's looking for that type of tight end. He completely changed the game.
Yeah, and I want to go to linebacker real fast. Some great names. Like I grew up, I'm 41, so these names are like the names for me. When I was growing up, it was Carl Banks, Cornelius Bennett, Teddy Bruschi, London Fletcher, Seth Joyner, Wilbert Marshall, Clay Matthews, Willie McGinnis, who was on our show Tuesday and will be on throughout the NFL season, Carl Mecklenburg. Man, I remember him on those Broncos teams that got their asses whipped in the Super Bowl every single year. He was the one guy that was on that defense that was any good. They had some terrible defenses for a Super Bowl team. Sam Mills from the Saints. Sam Mills played for the Philadelphia Stars, did he not? Of the USFL?
Stars, yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Chris Spielman from the Lions. Takeo Spikes, who had a cup of coffee with the Eagles. Darryl Talley, a WVU Mountaineer with the Bills. He was on those Bills teams that went to the Super Bowl. And then Miami Dolphins, Zach Thomas. So that is a excellent crew of linebackers, man.
Yeah, and I don't think I agree with you, but I don't think any of them are Hall of Fame. I think they're on the cusp. Some of them, not a lot of them. But I don't think you look at any of those names and think historic players. And obviously, probably the greatest linebacker of all time, arguably the greatest defensive player of all time, Lawrence Taylor, would be at the top of the Hall of Fame list. And then you start talking about the Dick Butkuses of the world. I don't see that kind of dominance in that group. Cornelius Bennett, probably in his prime at the top of his career, would be the guy closest to that. I just think you got a lot of good players right there, but it's not the Hall of Good, the Hall of Fame.
Hey, I'm okay. I always admit I'm a very tough grader, so I'm okay with leaving guys out because they just were very good and not elite, special, different. The defensive backs, former Eagle Eric Allen, Steve Atwater. He was on some of those defenses with Carl Mecklenburg. Champ Bailey, Rondé Barber, Bill Bates. Remember him growing up with the Cowboys. Leroy Butler was an excellent Packer. Rodney Harrison, Ty Law. They were a part of those great Patriots team. John Lynch, a lot of people talk about him. Tim McDonald, I remember him with the Cardinals and the Niners. Ed Reed, he should be a shoo-in, right? Troy Vincent's on there. Darren Woodson as well.
Yeah, I think Ed Reed and Champ Bailey are the shoo-ins. I talk about it almost every year. I can't believe Steve Atwater's not in the Hall of Fame.
He couldn't play in today's game the way they hit now, though. Atwater was a headhunter, man.
No, I agree with that. Kenny Easley as well, and it took him a really long time. That's why I was kind of surprised that Brian Dawkins got in as quickly as he did, because it's always been historically very, very difficult for safeties to get into the Hall of Fame. The all-time interception leader, Paul Krause, took him almost 2 decades to get in. I mentioned Easley. It took him forever. Atwater still not in. Ed Reed, though, sort of trumps everybody. And he's in the same category as Tony Gonzalez. I mean, that's one you don't even talk about. You don't even discuss. And it comes down to, I think you should have 2 in. I think Ed should go in. And I think Steve Atwater should go in.
Along the lines, coaches, these are interesting. Bill Cowher, whose name comes up much like Gruden's forever, every opening. Don Coryell had those great Chargers. Tom Flores, the Raiders. Mike Holmgren, Jimmy Johnson, Dan Reeves, Richie Pettibone, Marty Schottenheimer, Dick Vermeil is also on among some others there. So some very interesting coaching names for the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because it generally in the past they've always gone towards longevity over the short periods we talked about as a player. Somebody like Terrell Davis, obviously, in a short period, Jimmy Johnson dominated, but I just don't think he did it long enough to be a Hall of Fame coach. At least if history is any guide, despite the fact that I just don't see people like that getting in. So I would think a Mike Holmgren would be closer, for instance, because he did it for a lot longer period. But it's always interesting with the contributors coaches because can be more political in that aspect of it.
All right, good stuff from John McMullen. The Pro Football Hall of Fame announced its class of 2019 nominees. And top of that list, Tony Gonzalez and some others. So good stuff there, John. John, we were talking about earlier in the show. I don't know. Did you ever cover the USFL?
No, I'm not quite that old. I
was going to say. I didn't know when you got started. All right, well, we were talking about the book, the Perlman book that's out, and I was reading a little bit of that and just how that league and some of the influences that league had on the NFL. And, I mean, what a bizarre situation. You have, I kind of describe it as a league that had, practice squad players mixed in with NFL Hall of Famers.
Yeah, really. People don't realize how many good players were in that league. And the Philadelphia Stars were, and eventually became the Baltimore Stars, were one of the most dominant teams. But, Reggie White started there. You mentioned Hall of Famers, Gary Zimmerman, just big-time players. Anthony Carter started in the USFL with the old Michigan Panthers, if you remember him. Sort of like what they're trying to do. The AAF is trying to do this, and
can you kind of
Carter?
Can you compare, make a compare? For me, I was 5 at the time, so I don't remember the league at all. But the level, where it was, in the level of coverage, and was it something that was an afterthought, or was it covered similarly
it was much bigger than the other secondary leagues over the years. Probably, way to the World Football League came together. That also had some decent players. And obviously you go back to the AFL, NFL, which was ultimately merged. But the USFL since that time, that was the best league because they went out and tried to get some of the best players. Not only tried, they did. There were a lot of first-round picks that decided to sign with the USFL because they were giving them more money. But it was, as you mentioned, once you spend big money on Reggie White for the, and they tried, Reggie was on Memphis, going to Tennessee. I mentioned Anthony Carter was on Michigan. people remember that Stars team, will remember the quarterback was Chuck Fusina, who was at Penn State. So they tried to keep these famous college players in their markets, and it did have more popularity than most secondary leagues. But, hey, when you spend that much money, it's very difficult to continue on. They were spending more money for their star players, Herschel Walker, another one, with Donald Trump and all that. They were paying their star players more than the NFL was, and that wasn't gonna continue with the crowds they were drawing. But it did get a lot of media coverage because of the players they were able to sign.
Yeah, and now one of the things I read in the book was essentially Walker wanted to leave school early. The NFL had a rule that you couldn't leave early, and the USFL said, we'll take you. And essentially the NFL, essentially changed their rule because of the USFL.
Yeah, and that, that's happened in basketball as well. It only takes one player to kind of fight the system. And leagues, it's a catch-22. You talk about it today in basketball and football. It's probably better for kids to stay in college, but it's tough to take that argument to court and say, I want to prevent this adult from making a living if somebody wants to pay him. It just doesn't hold up. So it was going to happen ultimately, but, yeah, that sped it up. And you sort of try to get together with the Players Association and deem what's best for both sides. And now we have the 2-year rule. But, I mean, that was going to happen, and certainly the USFL contributed to it.
Hey, before we let you run here, quick Eagles notes. I got the injury report here. Shelton Gibson and Darren Sproles did not practice. Now, Sproles, I guess, with that hamstring, is that precautionary, do you think, or is there some legitimate concern that he will not be ready to play on Sunday?
Well, I think there's legitimate concern now because they practiced on a limited fashion on Wednesday, and now they didn't practice at all, both Sproles and Gibson. And it's interesting because that's their entire kick return game. Shelton's the kickoff returner. Darren Sproles is the punt returner. So they're going to have to revamp that if both of those guys can't go. Corey Clement is listed as the backup at both. DeAndre Carter can return punts. Wendell Smallwood obviously has returned kickoffs in the past. So they have some other options. But you kind of saw last year, you want Darren Sproles as your punt returner especially. So, yeah, I mean, I think the injury report trended in Tampa Bay's direction today because those guys took a step back. And on the other hand, for the Buccaneers, Deshaun Jackson was able to do some things. So who knows, maybe we'll get through the concussion protocol. Jason Pierre-Paul was out there as well. So maybe those guys are trending in the right direction.
All right, we'll have plenty more on the matchups in this game tomorrow. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and he will be a part of Mosher, McMullen, and Krause tonight at 6 o'clock. New show starting at 6, right after us, from the landmark Americana in Glassboro. It's a great spot, by the way, and I believe they've got tickets for the game this weekend. So listen to that tonight at 6 with the guys here on 97.3 ESPN. We're looking forward to that, man, on the drive home. You guys shall be entertaining. I certainly believe that, and we look forward to hearing you, man.
All right, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Got to jump in the car and get to the landmark.